So I'm going to talk to you about woodland ponds, but actually I'm going to spend quite a lot of time saying to you that woodland ponds are like lots of other kinds of ponds, and we don't know very much about woodland ponds in reality. So I want you to don't go away feeling disappointed when you hear me say that we don't really know quite what the right thing is to do, because actually we still know, although there's loads and loads of woodland ponds around here and loads in other parts of the country, actually we know surprisingly little about their ecology specifically compared to other ponds, and we also know surprisingly little about what the effects of pond management are still. We first wrote an article about this almost 20 years ago today, about new approaches to management of ponds, which I'm not going to talk about much today, although you might well be interested in that original article. And frankly, our knowledge of management and its effects on ponds, good and bad, hasn't changed very much since then. It's one of our biggest gaps as an organisation, understanding the effects of management. Anyway, let's... So we became the Freshwater Habitats Trust from having been pond conservation for about 20 years or so. We were formed in 1988. We changed our name last year to the Freshwater Habitats Trust because we've always worked on all kinds of fresh water. We actually do all sorts of freshwater work, and we, for a long time, thought, well, we didn't want to. We've been thinking about this for a very long time. We didn't want to change our name because the ponds was our special thing. But we're doing so much other work, it came to so many meetings saying, well, we're called pond conservation, but we also do stuff on rivers and lakes and ditches and streams. So we finally bit the bullet and thought, right, ponds are now seen as quite important. When we started, nobody really took them seriously, to be honest. They were just a little thing where we went dipping with the kids, but no one thought they were important biologically. Now that has more or less changed. So we took the step and have brought the ponds into the world of fresh water, which is why we changed our name, and it's already bearing fruit, because it just makes the work we're doing be taken more seriously by the powers that be. Because lots of people think fresh water is important, many fewer still think that ponds are important. So that was why we changed our name. We have a very specific aim, which is to protect the life in freshwater, the freshwater biodiversity. And ponds are really obviously very important for that. We'll touch on this very briefly. I won't do the talk about how great ponds are particularly. We'll just touch on bits of it. But ponds, if you look across the landscape, probably it will be true in this landscape here, they are the place where you see the greatest variety of freshwater species, of any freshwater habitat, which always surprises people, especially freshwater biologists, because they haven't realised this for about 100 years of freshwater biology. Despite their small size, despite them being the smallest usually in most landscapes, even here, where there's a lot of ponds, they'll probably still be the smallest bit of the water environment in the physical area, but I would bet my bottom dollar that they will also be the place where you can see the greatest variety of freshwater plant animals, even compared to bigger rivers, the big reservoirs and so on. That's a pretty general phenomenon, and of the bits of information that we've collected over the last 20 years, that was the single most important revelation that our research work, as opposed to our practical work, has shown just how rich ponds are at a landscape scale compared to other freshwaters. I will show you a picture which summarises all that later on, but it's a pretty fundamental thing to know right from the word go, really. So our organisation is interested in all kinds of freshwater, some of the freshwaters that we're interested in here. We do research because we like to underpin what we say by good information. We do a lot of practical actions, we lobby on behalf of freshwaters, and we give advice and information. So that's the sort of stuff we're doing today, I'm here talking to you about. You can get loads more, almost everything I'm going to say to you today, you can get some more information about it, probably for free, usually for free, just by going to our website. And actually what I might do, because I haven't brought a whole stack of documents, because I wasn't quite sure what the nature of the audit was going to be today, I might just send you an email circular, if that's later on, with some suggestions about things you might like to download from our website, and one or two things that you can get to follow on some of the things here, if that's all right, Matt, later.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, we can circulate that afterwards.
So that's what we do as an organisation, essentially. These things which go together to make up practical conservation these days. We're not a very big organisation. We're not that small, but we're not that big either. We've got 15 staff, 20 if you count people who work with us kind of on a casual basis. We've got a modest number of paying members compared to the RSPB's million. We've got quite a lot of volunteers doing work with us, particularly doing survey work. We're developing a national survey network called PondNet at the moment, which we hope will go quite big next year with a large Heritage Lottery Fund grant, which might interest some of you as well later on if you're interested in actually collecting information about your ponds. And just because it's ponds, because everybody, even though there's this kind of split brain thing, everyone loves ponds, but nobody took them very seriously. So there's a huge network of people who are actually willing and interested, and we've been kind of pushing them along to realise just how important their interest is in these small water bodies. So there's a big network of people who are willing helpers, if you like, who are sympathetic to the cause. So just to summarise the way we work, I guess, this is, we try to get the evidence that something's going to happen. So for example, we work on a thing called the Countryside Survey. That's what the graph is meant to represent there, which showed that nationally ponds got worse in terms of their plant richness between 1996 and 2007. Don't worry about the details too much. We translate that kind of information into policy. So this little box here doesn't look very impressive, but this is probably the single most important set of words we've written in the last 20 years. This is a box that's cut out of the Natural Environment White Paper that was produced in 2011. That box is in that white paper because of information like this that we help to collect. And then we take that policy, that stimulus for action, into doing practical things like this pond here, which is digging a pond complex at Rye Harbour, a set of new ponds which will be creating excellent wildlife habitat in that neck of the woods. And that action is going on there. This has been done by the Environment Agency. That action is really going on there because of the policy, the information, the policy, and the stimulus that our work's been giving to this kind of action over the years. So that's sort of how we work. I thought it might be just useful quickly to have a few pictures go right back to square one, just in case, to just talk about what ponds are, just to see something of a variety of ponds, because you'll be very familiar with, I guess, with lots of very wooded ponds, but there are lots of other ponds that look quite varied in the round if you look across the whole country. So, we often think of ponds as either something like this, in the popular imagination, the thing in the garden, or rather ornamental. In that case, this one is full of a non-native alien plant, the Myriophyllum aquaticum parrot's feather, which is a bit of a undesirable plant that's got out into the wild now as a result of the garden centre trade cultivating that. Gets in the garden ponds. Once you put it in a garden pond, that's basically releasing it into the wild. Or you'd be thinking of ponds like this. The classic old-fashioned village pond is how village ponds used to look 100 years ago. What always amazes me about these photographs is how bare, how short the vegetation is everywhere, how everything these days is really lush. I guess because there's no grazing animals and there's huge amounts of nutrients. Quite possibly, this pond would still have had really clean water at this time. Not saying it happens in most villages these days, but anyway, we've got this view of gardens and villages as where our ponds are. So it's worth looking around at some of the other kinds of ponds when you really start looking at the landscape, and this has been something that I think has driven a lot of the growth in interest, people realising that there's a bit more to ponds than these two things. Strict definition, one of the first things we invented a long time ago. Ponds are man-made or natural water body, because of course ponds are entirely natural kind of habitat. We make a lot of them, but they have existed more or less since the Earth formed. If you look back in time, you can realise that as soon as there was land, there would have been ponds formed by the rain on that land. So they're very natural. Obviously, none of the ones that made them still exist, but they are completely natural in that respect. And we defined them as between 1 square metre and 2 hectares. We did a simple size definition because there are lots of other definitions that have been circulating over the years, but actually like light penetration, pond, light doesn't get, you call it a pond because the light can get to the bottom of it rather than a lake where the light can't get to the bottom. But actually none of these definitions, where it might have wave action or not, none of these definitions really work in practice because you can never turn up to a place and say, oh yes, the light's getting to the bottom of that pond without a whole load of measurements. I mean, years of measurements. So you have a simple size definition. And importantly, they can either be permanent or seasonal. They don't have to have water in all the time. That can be a shock for people as well. In fact, maybe half of all species in water are perfectly happy with periods of drought or actually need periods of drought. So it's very surprising just how important seasonal water is. So they can be large, like this natural pond in the Cairngorms, just on the edge of Abernethy Forest. They can be small, which looks like nothing really, a tiny puddle in a trackway. This old trackway is the habitat of an endangered water plant called tassel stonewort, which is found in a relatively handful of places. And these ponds, which dry out, are shallow and pristinely clean. It needs very clean water. As it happens, this has now been destroyed by a railway development scheme. They can be man-made or natural. Here's two ponds which summarise this. These are in Oxfordshire. These are quite big ponds, so this is a Google Earth map picture. This is from space. This is a natural pond called the Fowles Pill. It's in an old river channel. And next door to it, we made a new one, which has many of the characteristics of this natural one. Function, essentially, biologically, it's exactly the same. So they can be man-made or natural, and both of these are some of the best ponds in the country, absolutely, because again they've got really clean water as it happens, very unpolluted. So man-made or natural, permanent or seasonal. Here's a natural seasonal pond in a kind of place where you don't really expect to see many seasonal ponds. The Lake District, you think of the Lake District as full of big permanent water bodies. Here's a natural tarn in the Lake District which dries out in summer and is none the worse for that. It has a different kind of plant and animal community because it dries out. A few more pictures just to scan through. So nice temporary pond in Oxfordshire. This also, as it happens, is the habitat of this endangered plant called the tassel stonewort. Another temporary pond, which might look like a pond. This is a temporary pond in Oxfordshire with habitat of one of Britain's most endangered water beetles. Tiny trefoil pool in the New Forest, completely natural kind of water body, about the size of a garden pond. Habitat of this endangered snail, the mud pond snail. Temporary pond on a floodplain. River floodplains are places where there tend to be lots of natural, very shallow ponds which look like nothing until you start dipping in them with the pond net and you see they're full of stuff. They can be ponds in upland areas. This actually is a man-made pond on the edge of the Lake District, at a place called Under Millbeck Common. It's the habitat of the medicinal leech in this particular location. So there's lots of, one of the things about the Lake District is, although it's called the Lake District, it's actually got loads and loads of ponds in it. No one ever really bothers about them. They're kind of the minor item in that landscape, but actually there's a hell of a lot more ponds than there are lakes. They call them tarns and things there, but they are still basically ponds. They can be natural, like this one. This is in Wales, on Anglesey. This is actually a kettlehole pond. Some people might look at this and say, oh, well, that's a lake, surely. Well, maybe, but actually it's only 1.3 hectares, so strictly speaking, we would call it a pond now. They can be on the coast. That one doesn't look much like a pond. It's in a dune slack system. This is the dry period of the year, so just like the driest place you can imagine, so the sand dunes. But in sand dunes, there are often temporary pools created as the groundwater comes up in the winter, and they're fantastic places, very often. Very easily destroyed, of course, but fantastic places. They can be tiny, their size, we've already seen they can be tiny. This one is a brilliant pond. This is sort of a cross between natural and man-made. Any guesses what might have made this? Posed as a clue.
Cattle poaching.
Yes, well, cattle rubbing on this post to scratch themselves, trapping a little pool there. Now, that might look like nothing at all, and probably in some parts of the country it wouldn't be very interesting. It is quite a nice patch of landscape, not very intensive, and it's special because it's one of the few places, like two places in the country, where this amazing creature, the tadpole shrimp, which is one of our most endangered, rarest freshwater animals, is found. It's a temporary water specialist. It's been around since the Devonian times, this creature. It lives here, and this is at Calaverock on the Solway Firth, and it also lives in the New Forest. It's found across continental Europe as well. Everywhere you look, this creature is declining. It needs high-quality landscapes, not intensive, no pollution, basically. Very gentle, maybe very gentle animal grazing. And here it is in this little pool, which is, literally from like here to here. And one of our most endangered and most highly protected creatures, as it happens, is listed in the Wildlife and Countryside Act, and we're very keen to protect it. It can include ponds, can include places like this acid pond in the uplands in mid Wales. It can include places like this mountainous looking pondy place, It's only 0.5 of a hectare though, so it's still a pond in Snowdonia. Nice natural lochlan in Scotland, of which of course there are thousands. Somewhere close by on Heath, lovely pond on Heathland at Hothfield, not far from, well, not so far from here. Tiny little pool again. This is a pool created by excavation in a fen. So people used in the past to dig up peat to burn it, and a lot of our very highest quality fens have this very subtle, gentle digging, which we don't really do anymore now, because no one in this, well, they do it in Ireland of course, but in this country we don't really burn peat anymore. So for conservation purposes, people will still dig these little pools, and this is the habitat of another endangered water plant, this dwarf stonewort, which only lives in little pools like this in fen systems. Right, so that's a quick squint through the variety of water bodies we're talking about here. Much more varied, much more diverse, much richer, much more important for a very wide variety of endangered species than the traditional view of the garden and the village pond that comes with much of our popular understanding of it.